Hello, healthcare humans. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of The Other Human in the Room. Okay, so now we are in part three of my little series on harm reduction strategies around moral distress. If you're watching the video, it might even be clearer, but I'm actually recording these all in a row. So I've been sitting still for like 3 hours. No, not that long. I've been sitting still for a while. I just did a little shimmy, but I don't know. This topic has been on my heart, and especially after sort of hearing the stories of what fellow healthcare humans are going through and how moral distress is really causing so much pain and suffering for myself, but and many of us out there in healthcare. I really wanted to kind of like birth out this podcast series and share my thoughts just in case one idea in everything I'm sharing can help one person. And so if you haven't listened to the previous episodes, I would suggest going back and doing it. Otherwise, I don't know if everything I'll say this in this podcast will make sense. The first one, I kind of just shared the overview of what moral distress is, and particularly kind of just teasing out the concept of socialized moral distress, where we are feeling culpable and guilty, using the emotion of guilt as our signal, guilty of things that are actually not in our control and are not are things that we've been socialized to think we have to hold on to as a value or a moral, but when we look underneath, is not our true personal values, right? And so sometimes we experience moral distress, and it's really something where we need to decondition ourselves from some socialized guilt that we have internalized. And then other times we do this reflection, and especially the second podcast was talking through concrete ways of processing emotions and accepting reality as it is, as two tools that really help me get clear on, am I doing something here that when I sit with my emotions and view reality as it is, I recognize I am not taking action that is in line with my actual values. And so that piece alone, just processing the emotions of it and accepting things as it is, can often provide enough relief that we're good. But especially in the times where when we do that process, underneath we realize, oh, like, this isn't a case of me actually recognizing I'm doing my best, me recognizing that the world is hard and cruel at times, and I just need to practice more grieving and acceptance and grieving and acceptance and carry on because I'm actually quite good and realize that my actions are in line with what I want to do. So if that's what you discover, that's lovely. And then sometimes what we discover is that some of our actions are really not in line with our values. And that's what this podcast is about, is like, so what do we do when we go through this process and we recognize, oh man, I've learned something new about how the world works, or I've experienced something myself that changes my perspective on the kind of ways I speak to people, the kind of care I offer people, the policies of my office, like, or healthcare setting, things that are, and when I say policies, I mean things that are under my direct control. So if I'm in a position of leadership where I'm in control of the policy and I realize, yikes, this policy is not in line with my values, I wanted to create a podcast of how you can practically start to take different action, because sometimes it's as easy as, this light bulb moment of going, holy moly, I always thought that I was doing a good job by berating all of my patients over a certain BMI to lose weight. But now I have read some books and done some studying, and I realize I should never tell anyone to lose weight. And I just feel like totally clean and fine with that. And I'm like, good. Most of us, I shared in the first episode, most of us are kind of actually in this messy middle where we recognize that our values, either our values have changed or we have clarified what our values are. And now we're looking at what we do in our work in healthcare, and some of it feels a little yuck. It feels a little yikes. It feels a little, oh, what do I do in this situation then? This feels quite gray. When do I prescribe an opioid? Or, some of the examples I gave before, right? And so, those are times where, in some ways, not moral distress, but having a sense of morality and guilt signaling, ooh, I am trying to figure out what way I am acting in integrity with my actions is a good thing. Like I said before, it reveals that we are in touch with our values and morals instead of being cynical or just defending things as being okay the way they are, right? And so, having said that, though, oftentimes it is hard to change overnight because we have been acting another way for a reason, right? And so, definitely that same concept of harm reduction. It's one of my favorite concepts ever. It's certainly helped the way I practice medicine to view incremental harm reduction as a strategy that is more accessible to many of my patients, and in how I offer ideas to patients. To think of it as this process over time has been incredibly rich and helpful. And so it can apply to us too as we consider making changes to how we practice medicine, how we show up, how we change our speech, how we change our practice patterns, right? We need to have harm reduction towards ourselves, rooted really deeply in self-compassion and self-understanding and self-love. A place I know that I have to do this a lot outside of medicine is in parenting. Because, before I became a parent, I thought it would be so easy just to be rooted in my values of what I wanted to do as a parent and never yell at my kid and always be so gentle and compassionate and kind. And then I had children, and they are real live wires of human beings, and so am I. And so I could really take myself down if I thought that I had to have this perfect aligned action with my values every time in the area of parenting, instead of viewing it as a practice. And that's what I'm going to offer you, both if you struggle with parenting like I do, but also with patients and also with colleagues, and also with when you realize that some of the ways you show up are not in line with your values in terms of, I don't know, gossiping. I love a good gossip, but say there's something that's you realize is not in line with your values, the ways you say yes too much, the ways that you get all fawny and people pleasy and aren't as your authentic self, the ways that you struggle to set boundaries, whatever it is that you struggle with, the ways that you find it hard to let go of perfectionism. And so then that means you stay up late and then are snappy with your family and never see them. Or a lot of times stuff we're doing, we're aware doesn't feel good. And it's not how we want to do it as an ideal, but we just feel trapped. We feel stuck in it. And so the reason that you're acting outside of and out of alignment with your values and out of integrity with who you want to be and who you believe is your best self, the reason you're doing that is for your own survival and protection. It is because of your past experiences. It's because you've been conditioned to believe you would be at risk of harm if you did center your own values. You've been in systems, oppressive, at least borderline, if not straight up abusive systems that have manipulated and brainwashed you into thinking it is better to uphold their values instead of yours. You have to always be on time. You're a bad doctor if you're not. And so you pressure yourself to be on time with every visit, even if your values would want to spend more time with people. Or if you're like me, you try and fail to stay on time and half honor your own values and then just beat yourself up about the whole encounter, right? Versus what happens when you really truly center, what are my values here? I have a value of sitting with this patient one at a time. I, can maybe take some strategies to clean up what I do in the room so that I'm only doing what I love best in the room. And that actually will save me some time. I've noticed that. But I'm not even interested in upholding the value of strictly staying on time because some other older white dude in my practice doesn't. There are no older white dudes in my practice. That was just an example. Okay. So, but just to say, the reason that it's so hard to shift is because we've been socially conditioned to act against our own best interests. We have been socially conditioned to abandon our own values for other people's benefit, right? And so we have to do this work incrementally, starting with whatever action feels possible for you to start practicing. This is true whether we're talking about, say, time management, like I just said, or, say you're learning a lot more about racism or colonialism, and you're like, yikes, a lot of the things I was taught actually I can see are not trauma informed or are not helping people. Oh no, oh no, oh no. And now we start to beat ourselves up about it. Hey, we'll get to all of it eventually. But what's one thing that you've learned that you do feel is accessible and available to you to start trying to put into practice? Because when we spin in the shame and the guilt, and just like get stuck in the distress of it, then we perceive it as moral distress. Like we have no choice but to continue to act immorally. And the main thing that practicing aligned action shows us is that we actually always have choice. There will be some example someone gives. I do think of the example of when, like, COVID was really, really rough in the hospitals, and there's, if someone really had like one ventilator left and there were two people there, and they experienced the distress of not being able to offer the care to the one person. And that's like, you got to feel all those feelings and offer yourself so much love and grace, but then maybe acceptance that this is just how rough it got. And that is harmful and painful and something you need to process. But even then, there's some kind of choice. You can't magic a second ventilator in this example, but there is some kind of choice that can be made of how to stick as closely to your values as you can, working through an incredibly, absurdly horrible circumstance, Like people practice in many places in the world, places that are really struck by war and violence. Including this country, right, in certain ways, but like even maybe more overt war and violence. And they can still stick with their values in making really hard decisions. And it doesn't have to become moral injury and trauma if they stick with themselves and they know their North Star. They know what values they're operating from. And if anyone on the outside is trying to pressure them to do otherwise, they are in the practice of feeling that pressure maybe, but doing what they know is right for them anyway. And I think a lot of us are not in that regular practice. We have this bucket load of shoulds and have tos that aren't want tos. And by the way, that's my practical pearl. Like in terms of how you can know what your values are and what is right and what is socialized, what you wanted, like what's like your values that are you versus social values. I want to offer you that as a very simple barometer. It involves something that's not necessarily simple, which is getting in tune with yourself and your body, and is certainly a practice in of itself. It involves trial and error, which can feel hard, but it's what we're all doing every day anyway, right? But really, at the end of the day, the things that you feel trapped into having to and should do that you don't want to do, those are the things that are outside of what you value, because your body signals your values through like the emotions of desire and satisfaction and pleasure. Like you are in line with your values if you're doing things that feel good to you, that feel connected to you, that feel nourishing to you. Those are what your values are. So sometimes we think we have values, but they're all shoulds and have tos. Even like, I know I should never be racist. There's the value of that where you think, oh gosh, I now recognize the ways I've been socialized and our society's been socialized to view certain skin colors as worse than others. And I have a deep desire to heal that. And that's my value, right? That's different than like, oh, I should never look racist. Like those are two different things, and one will guide you and the other one will take you down. The one that will guide you is what feels good. It's what you want. It's really holding tight and really walking with the things that your body knows feels good to you, that you desire, that you want to do. And things that only feel like have to, should tos are the things that we let go of incrementally based on what feels available to you today. So some specific examples, practical examples that are things that I am in the practice of doing and I'm very imperfect at doing. But have I not said enough times on this podcast that perfectionism is a harmful societal value? Like if you think being perfect is on your like internal value list, I have really bad news for you. Unless you're a robot listening, it's not going to work out well because none of us are perfect, right? Unless you define perfect as who you are, then maybe that's how you could do it. Anyways, some examples. So maybe it seems silly, but I know it's not silly because I know it burns out a lot of clinicians. Shifting how you document to serve only you and, as an extension of you, your patients and colleagues, right? But like really only documenting to the extent that you want to, that makes sense for you, that you've really centered in like what is the essential, useful, helpful purpose of documenting for me and those that are a part of this patient's care in a way that feels good, in a way that doesn't sacrifice other values like connection with patients, like time with my family, and like navigating those and then finding what works for you. That on most people have to kind of practice doing incrementally because we've been so socialized and conditioned to feel guilty if there's, I don't know, typos, feel guilty if it's not long enough, feel guilty if it's not smart enough, not right enough, like all the things that are impossible standards that cannot be our personal values that we get socialized to think we need to do, to the point where it honestly starts to feel like moral distress. Like I'm trapped. I've worked with clients where they feel trapped by the level of documentation they feel like they have to meet for their system versus spending time with patients. And that then comes through as moral distress because they feel trapped. They've been like gaslit into thinking they're trapped. And the point of this kind of aligned action is to decondition yourself and really recognize the choice you have, which is to type less words. And it can come, listen, all of these things I'm about to say can come with social cost. There may be threats of firing you. There may be threats of things going wrong, college reports. I don't know. But the thing that I also know is, someone could be fired, someone could have college reports, someone could be sued, even though they have done all the shoulds and have do's as perfectly as they can. And they will have abandoned their own values along the way, and they will feel totally lost and betrayed because they've been betrayed by themselves as well as the system they tried to uphold so strongly, frankly. Okay, so we will have the fear of the social cost of doing things that are just in alignment for ourselves, and that fear will be real, and that fear will need to be processed. That's why also having connection with other people to cheer you on and help you do the brave thing. Because remember, bravery is not feeling fear. Bravery is feeling fear and doing things anyway. But over time, we learn and we really center ourselves in our own power and our own value in a way that really makes us unstoppable, irrespective of what some rando document obsessed leadership person may think of you. They don't have any power over you if you are in the practice of not letting them, you know? Another example. So shifting how you make clinical decisions to always align with your own values, only, and that's it. And you never do something that doesn't align with your values. This one may feel kind of wild and scary. Don't I have to follow all the guidelines? What if someone else sees my notes? What if they judge me? Don't I have to try and be a good clinician by some random conflicting outside standard that actually doesn't even make sense when you look at it directly because it like contradicts itself, right? Oh, what if I actually just make clinical decisions that always align with my own values instead? Interesting. What would that mean for how I practice medicine? How would that mean for how I show up at work, right? How would I navigate that? There'll be times where maybe your patients ask for something that's not quite, that does conflict with our values. So how would I navigate that with them without betraying myself and my values, And again, if someone's afraid of something bad happening, if they start to practice medicine that way, instead of trying to uphold an outside artificial standard for fear of punishment, I just want to remind you of all the different kinds of people who still practice medicine now. I can think of a few specific examples who have very different values than me and yet are still practicing medicine. I know people who practice medicine and their version of values includes not prescribing birth control. And my values are the opposite of that. I think that everyone should have access to birth control. And I actually feel quite strongly in my values about harm coming to patients by not offering them birth control. So here we both exist inside the practice of medicine, both continuing to practice medicine. So if they haven't gotten in enough trouble to kick them out of medicine, why am I afraid that if I don't document my notes well enough, I'm going to get kicked out of medicine? Or if I choose a third line medicine over a first line medicine because it fits what makes sense for this patient. It fits with what this patient is asking for. It's on the menu of things I want to offer them. Why am I afraid I'm going to get kicked out of medicine? I know it's a bit of a bummer analogy, but it's real, folks. And man, just practicing the way that feels good to you and getting and working through and releasing and processing the fear of somehow getting in trouble or getting kicked out is such empowering work and allows you to really nourish yourself and show up in a way that then you can feel proud of every day. That's the benefit. Okay, another example. Practicing small acts of advocacy towards system changes that you know will serve you and your patients. So, maybe it is joining a committee. Maybe it is writing an op-ed. Maybe it is tweeting about it. Maybe it is, pushing back, saying no to some governmental agency that wants something from you that you think is wrong for some reason. I don't know what your thing's going to be, but really declining to do things that are against your values often then conclude like agreeing to push for change in a way that actually feels good for you and then helps you feel like you can, sleep better at night, look in your patient's eyes better. Like my recent interview with Nahid Datsani and everything he's doing to do system change for homelessness at end of life care. Like that's such an inspiring example. It doesn't have to be as big as that, but it could be as big as that. Is that something you dream about doing, but you're afraid of like social cost or something? Like there's a way for you to do it, which can be aligned with all of your values. You can disrupt the system. Actually, we probably need you to disrupt the system. The system needs disruption. Let's put it that way. Okay. So if that feels like something you want to do, that's something that would be an aligned action as well. The last example I have here is holding boundaries around the amount and kind of work you're doing to honor yourself. Calling in sick when you're sick, for example, could be aligned with your values. If one of your values is, your bodily well-being. That's where, some of our values are really necessities. And we have to actually center and practice valuing ourselves as human beings and our bodily needs. And we will be guided by that, by what our body desires and wants for us. And so when we listen to, I do not feel capable of physically doing my job today. I have this other socialized desire in me not to let people down, but I can feel how that's a should and a have to. If it was up to me and there would be no social consequences, I would absolutely stay home. How can we honor that as often as possible? Truly, right? So something to think about. Saying no to patients even if they'll be upset. Saying yes to patients even if someone else will be upset. What if we didn't decide what actions we took or not took based on the potential emotions of others, but instead we're guided by our own internal desire? Sometimes this sounds dangerous. We've been socialized to believe that our desires are bad. I know I was raised in a kind of religion where it's like, ooh, especially the desire of a woman, my goodness, it's going to lead to dangerous things. But the more I've learned about what happens when we kind of root ourselves in our desire, especially if we notice when we get out of our scarcity mode and instead say, what's my deep desires in terms of what I want for my life and what I value in my life? If our hierarchy of needs, like our basic needs, are met, right? What I value in life involves things that only bring good to the world. And I'm not because I'm like a good, the same is true for you. I believe that 100%. That I feel like the science shows that, frankly. Like at our core, we are good and loving and caring people. And that is what your values will reveal for you. And the times that you don't act in good and loving, caring ways is because you're stuck in your survival brain and in scarcity brain. And that's when you act against your values, because you instead think you need to survive and protect and belong to something that is telling you to do something you don't deeply want to do, right? So that's why we are getting rid of all the shoulds and have tos and really deeply rooting ourselves in only our want tos. And that is how we will guide our values. All right. So when you start to do this, whichever of those examples sounded available to you, there's not a right one on that list. There's not a better one on that list. Starting with documentation or time management versus starting with advocacy work, those are equally wonderful. The one that is the wonderfulest one for you is the one that you can actually see yourself doing. Like literally, it's like I said no to one patient this week. I'm like doing a happy dance in the corner. If it's like you didn't want to say yes, but you usually would to please them, but instead you said no because it's more in line with your values, and I would just like be over the moon excited, happy for you, because that's how it begins. Because wherever you begin, fear and anxiety are going to come up. Fear and anxiety of being kicked out, fear and anxiety about being shamed publicly, fear and anxiety about all the social costs that can happen, right? Like I said. So one thing that really helps with that piece is really fact checking the chances of that happening, right? So fact checking even if you lost your current, how easy or hard would it be for you to literally lose your current job? Depending on what your job is, maybe it would be easy. Maybe you could be easily fired. For other people, it's actually kind of tricky to lose your job. Like, I think for me, I'm technically self-employed and like a contractor. Like, I'd have to, I guess, lose my license. Like, I don't even, all my patients would have to leave me. Like, it would be kind of tricky to lose my job. A lot of things would have to happen before that. And like I said, I can think of examples of other clinicians where I'm like, they haven't lost their job, so why do I think they're going to lose mine? Like, that's a big fact check for me for sure, right? And really, the bigger thing is, okay, so say there's a way you're practicing medicine now because you think you have to. You think you have to always. I use documenting as an example because I've done a lot of work with documentation with people, but whatever, you think you have to, I don't know, bring patients with diabetes in every 3 months. Otherwise, you're going to get called in by the college. Does anyone think that? Maybe. I don't know. But like, say you think that's true. And the cost to you personally of doing that, and also you notice the cost maybe to your patients, where then you get quite snippy and angry with them if they're late and they're quote unquote non-compliant against what you need them to do, which is come in and do their blood work and get better and have their A1Cs better. Otherwise, you can't be a good clinician. If that's not familiar for everyone, it's okay if it does. But like, you're kind of like, yikes, like, oh, if I'm, in order to stay what I think the definition of good clinician I've been handed, if the definition of the good clinician I've been handed involves me acting in a whole bunch of ways that I don't like myself doing, and my patients don't like me doing, but more importantly, I don't like myself doing, why do I want to be a good clinician at all? You know? Why would I want to perpetuate the ideals of a profession that I actually don't even like or want? What if instead I redefine what is a good clinician to be what is aligned with my values and what is right for me and what feels good and what I want to do? And that's my new definition of being a clinician. And what if that actually is then noticed by others, and others are like, oh, you don't have to check your email in your EMR inbox 50 times a day in order to be a good clinician. Ooh, and then what that does is a ripple effect that changes our collective definition of what a good clinician is. That's how change happens. It's fun. So, right? I don't want to intentionally and knowingly perpetuate a harmful version of a physician anymore in order to ensure my belonging. I don't want to belong to that club. And I'm using kind of a smaller example of checking inboxes, though it's not small. It's really like burning a bunch of people out, right? But like other things too, like, I don't know, say there was some standard that I had to always recommend one treatment over others, but when I'd done my own research, I didn't agree with that. I kind of don't agree in general that there should be one right treatment to offer most things. You know, I'm sure there's exceptions to that, but like, so if I was told by some outside standard, well, anyone who's a good clinician always has to practice medicine in XYZ ways. And if I looked at that and looked at my own self and my own values, I was like, well, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to be like that person. I want to be like me person, right? This is how we actually change and diversify, more importantly than anything. How diverse could the group of good clinicians look like? Why do we think it all looks like one person, especially an old straight white person often? So, but having said that, the fear will come up. And so the arguments I just offered are kind of things you can use to process that fear and anxiety and reassure yourselves against it of like, I hear you, fear and anxiety. We're afraid of getting kicked out of the club. That's why we haven't taken aligned action in the past, was to be protective, but I can protect us now. In fact, we don't even want to be a part of that club. We're a part of the new club, the club where we actually, practice according to our values. That's not dangerous. That's a good thing. So also, when you start doing this, the other kind of caveat and thing to warn you about is that more grief may come up, right? Because all of the things you have been doing have possibly been a futile attempt to avoid the grief, right? So, this is another one. So this might come up, like say right now, you are fighting the system a lot, including kind of fighting reality, and you're stuck in anger. And I've been there, and I know what that's like. And you've been really just like banging down every door, and just furious with the fact that the system is how it is. And remember that I have no problem with your fury. Your anger is sacred. It is a part of your grieving process. And I don't have a problem with you doing things angry. That's not the issue here. But like if you kind of get stuck there and push it to the limit and don't find a way through it to where you can kind of have acceptance that, okay, the people in power for this moment in time, the policies are the policies for this moment in time, and taking that step back to really from a place of like calm and focus to say, so what is one action I can do that's in alignment with my values in order to move forward? Sometimes when we don't do that, then how we show up in order to try and push for change actually violates other values, where we end up being quite unkind to people, where we end up really harming people or acting in ways that don't feel good for us, but we think we need to act in order to like further our cause. Like I think about the movie I talked about a couple podcasts ago, Women Talking. There's like a moment in that movie. The movie's about a bunch of women trying to decide if they should stay and fight their people who have physically harmed them gravely, or they should leave. And the person who's arguing for staying and fighting in this context realizes the only way that she feels like it would be within her capacity to fight is like by killing them and like becoming a murderer. Like, watch for that as well, right? That's not going to be aligned action necessarily if it actually consumes you too. That's why we got to do the processing our emotions, grieving and accepting first. Then we're clear about what our values are. And then we know not only what we're fighting for, but how we're fighting for it in a way that's still in alignment with our values and doesn't destroy us in the process. So that's the last kind of tip I wanted to give about that. So yes, that's like the last thing I want to say about moral distress. Because what happens when you start listening closely to times you feel moral distress, you start separating out, okay, is this moral distress actually socialized guilt? Like I am being socialized to take responsibility for things that are beyond my control. And actually what I'm dealing with here is the pure grief of witnessing suffering, which by the way is still not fun, but I'm going to process that suffering, accept this is exactly how it is right now. But I realize I am not culpable in this case. And so now I can move forward without feeling like I've been trapped into doing something I don't want to do, right? So like those are the first steps I talked about in the past podcast. But then the thing about ever feeling trapped into doing things you don't want to do, which is an essential definition, it's an essential component of moral distress. That's what practicing aligned action will give you the tools you need to just, I won't say never do again. That's very perfectionistic. And I'm sure I've done things that when I sit with my values, I realize, oh my gosh, that was not in alignment for me. But we reclaim ownership over them so we don't feel trapped by them anymore. We recognize that our actions are always our own and we take responsibility for our actions. We take responsibility for our actions, even times where it's like, you know what? The pressure of the people around me got to me and I did give in and do an action that I didn't want to do. We are still clear that we were in some amount of control over that. Or maybe control is not the right word because that makes it feel blamey. I just mean that we understand why the pressure was strong and we did not act out of our integrity in that moment. We understand it from a very compassionate place, right? Offering ourselves all that compassion. We're doing it to protect ourselves. We're doing it because we are been conditioned to prioritize the needs of others above ourselves. Okay. And every time we do find an edge where we can start to recognize the outside pressures, but choose the choice that where we do what we want to anyway, especially if the thing we're fear of is like kind of a theoretical policy thing that has no immediate threat to us, like those kind of things. Can we please get rid of those? So, incrementally for you, because it'll feel scary, like I said, but all of those are sinking us. And it is available to shift your definition of who is in charge of your actions so that you recognize the power you have to choose for yourself in very challenging conditions, in very unfair, unjust, horrific conditions, recognizing that that's where they are, holding on to your sense of yourself and choosing what is your own value is how moral distress doesn't take you down, because you feel it less, because you're like, listen, that was a horrible day. There was not enough of anything. And so that was a very painful day to attempt to practice medicine. And I still chose according to my values. So I can still feel good about what I did in this horrible, unjust, deficient system. You see how that lets you show up in a completely different way? And at some point it's like, and you know what? The system is not for me. I'm getting out of here. That's also like so valid and sacred. But especially as you're showing up, really understanding, connecting with your values connects you to your value. Like it's the same thing. And that it's how you can value what you do, even though there's so much need and there's so much deficit and there's so much broken about our system, This is how we do it, by taking those small but brave actions and feeling the fear of getting in trouble or consequences, but really just showing up and doing what is within our values anyway. I know you can. I know it's hard to do on your own. I am here for you, cheering you on from this podcast, on social media. And if you ever want to work with me directly as a coach, I certainly am doing this all the time with my coaching clients. Okay, so this is my last official part, I think, of this series. I do think I'm going to record one bonus sort of mini episode, which is me kind of just talking through how you can take defining your values to a deeper level. So if you are someone who is interested in doing some self-reflection work and getting clearer on what your values are, like including like value words, I know I have values that help me kind of make decisions that are aligned with what I know is important to me. I find it both useful to just ask myself, okay, what do I actually want? But sometimes when that's less clear, I find it useful to have sort of ideas and phrases that I can reflect on and use to make difficult decisions. So I'm going to release an episode that's specifically about that. That may or may not be of interest to you, as well as a worksheet. So that's what's going to come probably as a bonus later this week. But otherwise, that is the end of my series on moral distress. I would love to know how this resonated with all of you. I have thoughts about this being too theoretical. I have thoughts about this being too something or other. My socialization of questioning what I've just created is coming up at the end of this podcast. But I also know that what I have shared is what I know to be true. I know that what I've shared has absolutely been my personal experience. So I know it's coming from my heart. And so if there's even one thing out of the lots of different interconnected ideas that I've shared that brings you some relief, whether it's sitting with and processing your emotions, whether it's finding a way to have a clear-eyed view of what reality really looks like and having a sense of acceptance that allows you to move forward instead of feeling trapped and stuck and like you have no choice. And if you find a way then to start practicing shifting any actions that you haven't felt are integrity with your values, and over time really bringing it so that things that you do, are from your best self or from your aligned actions best you can, with tons of self compassion for all the times that you will instead act out of survival mode and do things against your values, those as well. All of these pieces, I do think these are how we can reduce the harm of moral distress, where it doesn't make it become this traumatizing, internalized thing. I'm not saying that if you do all these steps, it may not cause harm. I think it does cause harm. It's painful and harmful to try and care for people in our society right now, because our society's kind of rough. That's one of the other thesis of all these podcasts is like, you're right, everybody, the system is bad. Society is hurting each other, and validating that. But yeah, I hope some of that is going to serve you, because this job is really tough and your job is really tough. And I don't think we need to have some of these extra socialized shaming elements as a part of it. And finding ways to inoculate ourselves against it is one of my most important missions, to be honest. So I hope some of this has helped you. Okay, I hope everyone does have a week full of rest, full of nourishment that will fuel you to take one brave, aligned action this week where you think, okay, I am going to step bravely into what I know to be true for me and what I want, even though it feels like I'm going to die. I'm going to do it anyway and see what happens. I believe in you. All right. I'll see you next time.